I hope you're all doing great. Okay, I'm still waiting to hear when I can do some live sessions with you guys, but for the time being, I did want to go ahead and address a couple of questions that have come up and also give you kind of a brief overview of Adobe Illustrator. I think a lot of you guys have already figured this out, but just in case, I will try to give you a few tidbits as we go. All right, so once you open up Illustrator, and mine may look a little bit different from yours, I'm using CS6, I'm not on CC yet. I tend not to upgrade every single time, usually every other time. So anyway, I'm still using CS6 at the moment. So when you open up a new document, of course, you go into File and New. And there's a couple things I want you guys to look for. One thing that often messes people up is the units that they're in. If you do a 8.5 by 11-inch document, it's going to come out as a standard size that you guys are quite familiar with. But if this, for some reason, is on points or picas or anything else, it's going to come out much, much smaller than what you anticipate. So do make sure that you're working in inches, at least for this area. Your orientation. You can work with more than one artboard if you want, but for the time being, I want you guys to stick with one artboard. I will explain other options on this. And then you click OK. All right, so this is your standard artboard. Now, if you ever decide that you need to change your artboard size, you can use the artboard tool, which is right over here. Okay, and then you can just click and drag. Oops, sorry, that was creating a new one. If you want to click and drag one of the corners, you can make it smaller or larger as you need to. Okay, and also if you have your rulers turned on, you'll also have that advantage of being able to measure things out. Okay, so before we get any further, I do want to go through some of the basic tools, the layout of the software, and just some kind of general knowledge. Okay, so at the top, a couple things you guys need to know about is your preferences. Okay, you'll want to go through these. For the most part, they are standardized. You don't have to worry about them too much, but it is helpful to know that these are available and that you can change different things depending on how you wish to work. Okay, so this is Illustrator and Preferences. Okay, under File, the most critical ones you guys need to know about is, of course, creating a new file. You need to know how to save it, save as something, and save for web. When you're using save for web, this is creating like ping files, JPEGs, things like that. Okay, you also might need to know document setup and color mode. For anything in print, you're going to be working in CMYK. For web-based designs, you might possibly be working in RGB. It depends on the parameters that you're assigned. Okay, under edit, some very critical things. Honestly, in the early starting kind of point of working with Illustrator, there's not a whole lot in here that you might use, with the exception of cut and paste. I always use my keyboard shortcuts for cut and paste and undo. Those are the kind of the few keyboard shortcuts that I use when I'm teaching. Cut is, of course, the Command key and X. Copy, Command C. Paste, Command V. If you're working on a Windows-based machine, these shortcuts will be slightly different, but I expect they'll be quite familiar to you with the X, C, and V. Okay, I almost never use these. I have some other ways of handling this type of stuff. It is nice to be able to check your spelling when you start using text. You might play with editing colors, but honestly, this is a tough way to do it when you're first getting used to working with Adobe Illustrator. So I wouldn't worry about this quite yet either. Under Object, some very handy tools would be the Arrange tools, and once I have some shapes, I can show you a bit more on that. Grouping and ungrouping, locking and unlocking. I won't get into expanding quite yet. Path, you might need to use, such as the Simplify tool. Outlining stroke is something that you'll do with text later on, so I'll get into that a bit later. There's a few other things in here which I would rather wait to show you guys until later on. All right, I'm just going through the absolute basics right now. Okay, anything that you need to do in type is easier done from the character palette or character window over here. So you really don't need anything here with the possible exception of create outlines, and I'll get into that when I cover text in a couple more demos. Okay, select. Again, I use my selection tools rather than any of these. Effects, these are all great fun to play with. For the most part, you're not going to be using them at this point in time. The logos that you guys are working on will not require that much an effect and will actually be negatively affected by using too many kind of fancy tools here. They're a lot of fun to play with, though, so I do encourage you guys to play with them. And there are some that you might possibly have a use for, especially Pathfinder might be useful too. Again, I keep Pathfinder open down here, though. All right, under view, there's a couple things in here that I do want you guys to be aware of. Whoops. Rulers, you can turn your rulers on and off. I prefer to work with my rulers on. Some people don't like them. It's kind of a personal choice. Grid is also on here, which can help you with alignment and spacing. So I often will work with grid on as well. What else? Those are the big ones. I won't go into these quite yet. Okay, zooming in and out is also here, but again, I have a tool that I like to keep open, and I use my zooming that way. And then windows, these are all the different windows that you can select, and you can choose which ones you keep open. There are some that I always keep open, and I actually save the look of my software and how everything's laid out by going to Workspace, and I created a new workspace, and I saved it as JWM Logo Work. Okay, when I'm working on a logo, there's certain things I like having accessible to myself. Okay, so again, we'll go through some of these a little bit in greater detail. Today's just a general overview. Other stuff you might need to know about are your brush libraries. Your swatch libraries can also be useful. You will not be using any of these symbols in anything that you are creating in this class. You're not allowed to, sorry. You will have to create everything by scratch. And the graphic styles are generally just way too detailed and way too cliche, I guess would be the term, to use for a logo. So you probably won't be using those. But again, this might be something fun to play with. Okay. All right, so those are the basic choices or basic menus you have up here, your pull downs. Your tools. Your two greatest assets are going to be your selection tool and your direct selection tool. You will use your selection tool when you are selecting an entire object. Okay, let me give it a color. Okay. Okay, if you want to select this entire object, you can do that with the selection tool. If you want to select only a single point, single anchor point, then you use the direct selection tool. And now you can make changes to it. Okay, so it's two different tools, two different purposes. You will use both of those a whole lot. All right, get into those another time. Your pen tool. Your pen tool is hidden under here, and anytime you have a little arrow in this bottom corner, it means that there is a sub menu underneath it, and you can pull off this sub menu of tools by clicking over here, and it will give you this tear off menu that then you can place wherever you like. I keep all my pen tools open all the time, so those are the 4 or the 3 that sit underneath this one. Okay, I keep these open all the time because I use them all the time. Okay, it's just convenient. Okay, text tool, and if you hold down text, you have all these other options. If you're working with a lot of text, you might like to tear this off as well. At this point, I don't keep it torn off, but you could if you wanted to. All right, you have your shape menu. Okay, again, this is another one that I keep torn off. If you just click and hold, you'll see all your different shapes that you can create. Okay, and I'll go through those in another demo as well. And you have your line tools. Okay, I don't use lines hardly at all. The occasional, single segment, but I do everything that I need to in shapes. Even if that shape is simply a very, very small rectangle, I almost always would prefer to work that way because anytime you're working with lines, you start limiting yourself on how you can fill and affect and adapt those lines. So you always want to work in shapes or in objects as much as you can. All right, you have your paintbrush tool, you have your pencil tool, and these also have submenus, just FYI. I don't use them very often, so I don't really spend a lot of time on them, but they're there. The blob brush tool, I don't think I've ever used that one. The eraser tool is occasionally useful. More useful are the scissors and the knife tool, and I'll get into those another time, but they are there. Rotate and reflect, I do use this one quite often, especially when I'm trying to make symmetrical objects. This is handy. Oops. Okay, scale is very handy. Reshape, I use from time to time. Share, every once in a while I find a use for share, but I do use scale and reshape quite a bit. Let's see, this one, I almost never use this one. Every once in a while I'll find a use for pucker or bloat or something, but most of these are just they give too much detail for doing logos, and logos is kind of the primary thing that I work with, so most of these are not that useful for me. Okay, free transform tool, again, occasionally I'll use this, but not terribly often. I usually just pick up my corners by the anchors or the points, and I will reshape as I need to. I can also use the reshape tool. I can also edit my individual points. I've gotten quite good with the pen tool at this stage. It takes practice, but you guys will get there as well. Shape builder, perspective, I just don't use many of these. Mesh tool is occasionally useful for color. Gradients, there's an easier way for me to use a gradient. You might like using this tool, so it's something you might want to just play with and see how it works. Eyedropper tool is good for selecting a color. Blend tool, don't believe I've ever used it. There's another way of doing that, which I find more easy for myself. Okay, symbol sprayer, column graph, don't really use them. Slice tool, occasionally I'll get use out of this. Artboard tool is very handy. I mentioned it a few minutes ago. But if you need to change the dimensions of your artboard, you can pick up on any one of these points and you can change the shape of your artboard. And remember, whatever is within your artboard is what is your final document. Okay. See, hand tool is for moving. I find other ways to do that. And the zoom tool. Again, I find other ways to do that. So you're asking how I'm doing all these things if I'm not using these tools. I keep some of my palettes open permanently. Navigator allows me to zoom in and out more quickly. Okay, I prefer using this tool. It's also a part of how I work is also molded by the fact that I've been teaching for so many years. I try not to use too many keyboard shortcuts. I try to make things as visible as possible. The keyboard shortcuts I do use quite often would include cut, copy, and paste, and also undo. Your Apple undo or command undo is a fantastic thing to know about. You always want to be able to step backwards, so if you don't like what you just did, this is one keyboard shortcut I will use. Okay? And also redo, if you hold down the shift key, you'll get to redo. Now you can do those things from the edit menu as well. You got undo and redo. You have all those options up there, but if you learn a few keyboard shortcuts, it will speed up your work considerably. All right, so Navigator I keep open. Info I like to have open sometimes. It's useful for having like measurements and such, but Navigator is what I usually leave open here. Okay, I do use my Pathfinder tools quite often, and I also use my line tools quite often. I am very, very particular about things being in alignment because the tiniest little bit off and it is so obvious to me and to me forever and ever. It's just one of my picky things. Okay, so I do keep these open. I also keep my swatches open, so I have my color palettes to work with. I have the basic brushes here, and if I open my brush libraries, I can also pull in a few more in here or have them as a separate window as well. Symbols, I almost never use symbols, very, very rarely. This just opens up automatically under brushes and swatches, so I just leave it there, but I don't really use it. Stroke, you will use stroke quite often, and we'll talk about all these settings that you can use. Gradients are helpful, and I'll go over those. Transparency, honestly, if I'm adjusting transparency, I usually do it more for the top menu, and you'll see that pop open once you have objects selected. You see you have your opacity here. There's also other options up here like stroke and such, and you might prefer to use these here as opposed to over here, and that's kind of a personal choice. This is fairly new, so the fact that I use this window dates me as using this program for a few extra years before they had this available. All right, character menu. I keep my character menu open, and I keep it open to the full limit. If you see this double-sided arrow and you click on it, you'll see that the character palette actually has different settings. I keep it open all the way, and I have paragraph and open type under that, but I can change my font size, I can change my font. I have my kerning over here, my spacing and leading, all these types of settings. All right, and also this is another one. You got small caps and all caps are useful down here. And paragraph, you have some of your other alignment tools. Those will go into. Open type, I rarely use it, but I'm sure there's a purpose for having it pop open automatically underneath these. And then the last window that I always keep open is layers and artboards. Okay, layers, once you start working, you'll be using these a lot. And artboards are handy if you're using, if you're kind of creating multiple documents simultaneously, such as what you guys will be doing when you have your logo created and you have to create a letterhead and an envelope and a business card. So when you guys start working on all those pieces together, it's nice to have all the pieces on separate artboards but in the same document. Okay, so again, we'll go through that another time too. All right, so this is just kind of a brief overview to kind of get you guys ready for working with Illustrator. And as soon as I hear back about doing those demos, I will definitely get to those. Alrighty, you guys have a great day. Take care.